Welcome, everyone. Today, we are starting with the foundation of our retention risk dashboard. We'll be transforming HR data to uncover hidden attrition risk. In the first section here, we are going to transform our HR data so it tells a story, not just of who left, but of who might leave next. Remember, the AI team's turnover has spiked to 34%, nearly triple the company's average of 12%. Our goal is to help leadership act before people resign. So let us go on now with loading and preparing our data. So we've successfully loaded our 4 tables to Power BI. We have the attrition history table. We have the dates table. We have the departments table and the employees table. So these tables will act as our foundations. So we can go on now to determine the relationships between these tables, okay? So let's head on to our model view. We can see what we have now here by default. So Power BI by default created the relationships here. So we can check to see if the relationships were created appropriately. If not, we can adjust, okay? For the relationship, the employee table will be connected to the attrition table in a one-to-one relationship through the employee ID. So let's see if that is what is happening here. So you can see that automatically Power BI created the correct relationship between attrition history and employees. So you can see that the attrition history and the employee table have been connected in the correct one-to-one relationship. Okay, connecting the employee ID from the attrition table to the employee's ID in the employees table. So that is correct. So let's move on to the next. The next relationship will be the date to attrition history relationship. So we have the dates table here. The dates table have no relationship. So we are going to be connecting the date to attrition history through the dates here to the termination date in the attrition history table. So I'm going to drag to connect this. So we have the correct relationship now, one-to-many relationship. So the next, which will be the third relationship we'll create, is the employees to department relationship, okay? From the employees table, we are going to take department ID to the department ID in the departments table. So that is going to be many-to-one relationship. Okay, so you can see that that relationship exists already, many-to-one relationship, okay? Okay, you can see it exists already, many-to-one relationship. From the employees table department ID to the departments table in the department ID, okay? Then, I think that is all, but there's something we have to do. We have to check if the relationship are active, because we need to make the relationship between the date and attrition table. We need to make this relationship inactive, okay? So we'll have to uncheck this to make that relationship inactive, okay? And the reason is that we want to use DAX to activate it dynamically with the use relationship function. So we can click on save. So with doing this, we are making this relationship between dates and attrition history table inactive. Okay. All right. So let us mark our date table. So we are on our date table. So you ensure that you're on your date table, and also ensure that you don't have gaps within the dates. Okay. So we will head on to table tools. Then under calendars, click mark as date table, then put it on, then choose your date column. Okay. We want the date column, right? Click on save and let it connect. Okay, so we have successfully connected that and mark our date table as date table. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to engineer the signals that we need, and we need several signals, especially in the employees table. Okay, so what we will do is to first determine the tenure in years. Okay, and we'll do that in Power Query. Okay, so the tenure tells us how long each employee has worked with our clients. So industry studies show employees with less than 1.5 years are more likely to leave. So that is why we are using the 1.5 as a margin to determine this. So we will need to determine this in Power Query, right? So we are going to go to our home tab and let's go to transform data. So it takes us to Power Query so we can transform our data there, basically our tables, right? So we want to begin with the employees table, employee that will be calculating our tenure in years, right? Okay. So, and we'll be doing that by adding a new column. So let's go on to add a custom column. We will call that custom column tenure in years. So because of the length of the formulas or most of the formulas, we are pre-written the formulas in our notepad, which will be made available to you. So you do well to study them and implement them, okay? So let's head on there and we want to copy this formula. I'm going to explain why it was written this way, okay? And we are going to paste this now here, okay? So what we want to do with this is to subtract the higher date from today's date, then divide it by 365.25 to get years. That is the 0.25 to get including leap year, okay? Now, I want to show you something, right? If we go ahead with this, we are going to get an error. We are going to get an error because our dates column, that is our higher date column, you see, doesn't have the timestamp as well as the time zone. I think currently it's even as text, okay? So that is why ensuring that you really work on your data to be on the correct data type is very important, okay? Now, this formula is correct. No syntax error has been detected, but we click OK, and we are going to get error, okay? So there are two things that happened there. The first thing is that we had not correctly set this data type to the correct time, the correct data type, right? So we have dates. We are not going to be using dates. We have date and time. It won't be enough for that. So we will pick date, time, and time zones so that we have it this way. So if we were not using the time zones, right? If it wasn't necessary for us to use the time zones, we would have not used time zones in that calculations, okay? When we talked about this column that is here, okay? That is this time zone, okay? So it's important that as analysts, we learn the global methods, okay? In case you have that because you will not always just work on your own time zone, isn't it? So let us take these added column out and add it the best way possible. Okay, so we are deleting that. So we had already changed this type to the appropriate type, right? Okay, so let us go back and add our custom column and call that custom column tenure in years, okay? And we go ahead and fix our formula. So this formula will correctly do what we expect it to do now, okay? So we click OK. Once we do that, we have our tenure in years. Remember, we said we are using industry standards to show employee, okay, to show employees that have less than 1.5 years, that is 1.5 years, because it's been reported that employees with less than 1.5 years in a company are more likely to leave compared to those who have invested time in the company, okay? So the next we'll be doing or calculating will be promotion stagnation. So not being promoted can silently demotivate employees, right? So we will build a yes or no column. That is true if someone hasn't had a promotion in the past 3 years. And we are going to apply that in our employees table here as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. We are going to still be adding a custom column. So we are going to click on custom column. Okay, we want to call that custom column promotion stagnation. Okay, and like I said earlier, we have to pick our formula to then come and explain our formulas. Okay, so let's do that. So we have it here. So let's copy it and then paste it. So while we paste it, let us look at it carefully so that we don't have an issue, okay? So you see the columns that we need. We need last promotion date, okay? We also need higher dates, okay? So with the formula we are using, if we don't ensure that those columns, those date columns are in the time zones data type, we are going to have an issue. So since we are going to have an issue, there will be no need progressing. Let us cancel this, okay? And look at those columns. We will need the last promotion date. So it's an ABC. So we have to set these in the right data type, okay? Date, time zones, okay? Then last review date, we will need that in future. So point taken, right? So let us make sure that everything that we need, that is dates or everything basically here, is set to the right data type. Okay, so higher date is set already. So let's just set everything as it should be, right? Employee ID is on text, which is still good. So full name text, gender text, age, it's not meant to be text. Let us make it whole number. Okay, so higher date as well. Job title, okay. Then department ID text, which is fine. Team text. Promotion count. So we have to make promotion count a whole number. Okay. Performance rating should also be, it's not whole number. Let's have it at decimal because we have decimals there. Okay. Engagement score, they are basically all whole numbers. Okay. So let's make them whole numbers. We've worked on last review date as well as promotion date. Then the tenure in years that we added was supposed to be in decimals, right? So let's put them in the right data type. Okay. So now we can go on without any disturbance. Okay. So let's go ahead and determine our promotion stagnation that measures if an employee has been promoted in the past 3 years or not. Okay. So we'll go to custom column and let's call it promotion stagnation. and we go ahead and insert our promotion stagnation formula. Okay, so basically what this formula would do is that if last promotion date column is null, like we can see it here, right? Last promotion date column, we have that some of the columns are null, right? If they are null, then we'll use higher dates. Okay, we start calculating from higher dates. But if it is not null, we will use the last promotion date. Okay, so stagnants will be calculated as duration the total days. Remember, we use this formula when we're looking at the previous calculation. Okay, so this formula now. So when we get this date, the current date basically, and is greater than 3 years, right? That means that person has been stagnant. Okay, so let's go ahead and click OK and see what we have. Okay, now you see that we have a true or false result now appropriately calculated or determined. So if you look at it very well, you see that this employee doesn't have a last promotion date. So definitely is going to use the higher date, right? Just as we discussed in the formula, okay? We have this now, but it's in ABC one that is any number, right? So, but we have the true or false data type here. So we are going to pick that so that we have the correct data type. Okay. So the next step we'll do is to add a critical risk date. Okay. So the critical risk date is important because we know that data refreshes daily, but we need a stable date, or we need stable dates for our alerts and action plans. Okay. So let us go ahead and determine that. Okay. So we will add a new column. Okay. And in that new column, we'll call that new column critical risk date. Okay. So this critical risk date, we will use date time.local now to determine that. Okay. So let's say date time.local now, open and close parentheses. So we'll be using today's dates, okay, and time. But when we are done with these, we'll convert it into dates directly, no date and time. So we'll click OK. Once we click OK, we have what we need. So we'll change this data type to date. So now we just have today's date, right? Okay. So that is done. So this column that we've added now, that is a critical risk date, will freeze today's date when we load data. So our dashboards and due dates stay consistent until the next refresh. Okay. All right. So we will have to go on with adding survey scores and days since review. So those will be 2 more columns, right? Okay, so let's add our survey score. But if you come to our employee table here, we have what we call engagement score, right? So this engagement score will be serving 2 purposes. Now, we don't want to just rename engagement score to survey score because we need engagement score somewhere. We also need survey score somewhere. So we can basically just have another column called survey score and another called engagement score. So let us go on now and add a new column that is a custom column. And this custom column will now be called survey score. Okay. The survey score will just be us copying what our engagement score, right? So we are going to pick this engagement score and say insert. So this is basically all we need because we just want to create a copy called the survey score. Okay, so now we have survey score and engagement score. So survey score is the whole number, so we'll make sure that it's whole number. Okay, so what we will do now is to determine our days since review. So we calculate how many days have passed since the employee's last performance review, okay? So we are going to calculate it this way. But first, let us ensure we add a custom column, okay? And we'll call that custom column days since review, okay? It's very important that you name them properly because we had named them already, ensuring that everything has a seamless flow within our formulas, even within the DAX we have written or we'll be writing in the future. So days since review, okay? It makes sense as well. When stakeholders look at this title, it's clear. So you use titles that make sense in that very industry. Okay, so now we are going to use this formula. So, all right, so our days since review is not here. So we are going to write it. We didn't fix it there, so we have to write it manually, okay? So remember we had calculated critical risk date, right? If we come to our column here, you see critical risk date, isn't it? And we also have a date column in our employee table called the last review date, isn't it? So these two columns will be helpful in helping us determine our days since review. So we'll say duration dot days. And the next will just be your subtracting last review date from critical risk date, okay? So that means we will insert critical risk date first, okay? Just double click to enter and we'll say minus the last review date, right? Okay, then we close our parentheses. So that is us subtracting what last review date from what critical risk date. Remember what critical risk date was, right? Critical risk date was what? Was the date we calculated with date times or local now. That is today's date, isn't it? Or the day you'll be calculating it, not necessarily today's date. For me, it is today's date, but for you will be the date you'll be determining the critical risk date. Okay. So let's click OK. And we have an error. Let's see. So now we use critical risk dates. All right. And when we look at this formula in days since or last review date, rather, if we go to last review date, you remember that we had converted last review dates to date time zones, right? And our critical review or critical risk date is calculated as what? As date or presented as date, isn't it? So we had an error. If you go to this error, you see the expression, we cannot apply operator minus to type dates and time zone details. So we have on the left this, right? Which the left is what? Critical risk date, right? So it's date format. Then on the right, we have the time zones, okay? So let us try and convert the critical risk dates to the same time zones and go ahead with our calculations and see what that will give us, okay? So let's convert this to date time zones, okay? Set. Okay. Then we will take out this step, this added custom column, okay? This day since review. We'll take it out and insert it again and perform that calculation so we can see, okay? Let's add a custom column, okay? So we want to insert it there. So we'll call that custom column days since review, okay? So we'll say days since review, okay? So the formula we used was, we'll say duration, right? Dot days, open parentheses, and we want to say critical risk dates. Okay, double click to enter, minus last review date. Double click to enter, then close our parentheses. So let's try this and see. We click OK. And now we have our results. Okay, so you see why we had the error, and you can see how we dealt with that error, right? Okay, so it is a class, and that is why I have to show us all of these dynamics, okay? And then secondly, always remember to rename your applied steps, okay? So that you will know how to progress, and it helps in collaborations as well, so that your other team members will know exactly what you've added there, okay? Let us go on. We have calculated our day since review. So they are decimals, rather whole numbers. So let's put them as whole numbers, okay? So there will be instrumental in determining future calculations. Okay. So now we have engineered our columns, basically just added columns that we will need in our DAX, right? So now, so if today, for instance, like today is 18th, right? And the last review date was January 18th, it will basically subtract that to show you the number of days within that range. So the meaning of this column basically is if someone hasn't had a feedback in over a year and a half, say over 540 days, like you can see, we had 576 days and so on. That is a warning sign, right? So we need to really create this so that management know what to do, next step to do, right? Bring out the problems before their eyes so that they can see using the data they have available. Okay. So now the next section will be us determining parameters using DAX. Okay. All right. So that means we can go ahead and use what we have done in DAX and Power BI. Okay. All right. Now we are back to Power BI, and under the employees table, you can see all that we've added: our critical risk date, our days since review, and so on. Our survey score, tenure in years. You can see that we have them here. Okay, right? They are all here. Remember, critical risk date to today's date, right? Okay, so now we need to calculate some measures, right? So the first measure we'll be creating is the attrition risk score, okay? So, and that will be on the employees table, right? And yeah, we are in the employees table, isn't it? Or aren't we? Okay, so now just to make sure, I click the employees table and I want to insert a new measure. I click on new measure, okay? So like I said, the measure we'll be creating is the attrition risk score. Okay, so we are going to call that measure attrition risk score. So all the calculations have been determined or pre-written using comments, so that while you study it, you remember clearly why we segmented it that way. Plus, we are going to also explain to you how it was written. Okay, so let's go here. So we have the attrition risk score here. So we want to use all of these. Okay, so I'm going to take copy from here because of the comments. Okay, till here. All right. So I'm going to paste this here. Okay, you see, but remember, we have not named this, right? So I'm going to name it and say attrition risk score, okay, and say equals. So right now we have done this, and you see, I said we had comments written. So these are comments. So we basically can discuss this now properly. Okay. So this first part of the DAX code here, okay, so it creates a virtual table, right, named weights. Okay, so the VAR represents variable. So we are saying create a variable weights. Okay, so we are creating a virtual table named weights inside the DAX formula. So this table only lives inside this calculation. It isn't saved in your data model. So let us clarify that. So like I said, um, VAR represents variable, and the name, the title of that variable is weight. So VAR here means that we are defining a variable called weights that we can use later in our formula. So in this case, weights will be a small table and hence data table, okay? Weights will be a small table, hence the use of data table. So data table is a DAX function that lets you quickly create a custom table directly inside your formula. So you define the column names, right? And we have used factor and weights, right? So now inside the data table that we have determined the column factor. So factor defines the first column and the name is what? Factor, right? The factor is the first column rather, and the data type is text. That is why we use string, right? All right, so now the second column will be weights, right? So the data type is decimal, hence double. Okay, now the rows. For the rows, that is what we are defining now. Okay, these are the rows. So tenure, we are using 0.25. For performance, we are using 0.35. For engagement, 0.20, and promotion, 0.20. So this means that we have under factor as a column in this our mini table, in our data table here that we're creating within our DAX formula, is that we have under factor the following items: tenure, performance, engagement, promotion. Under weights, that is the weights that we give to these items in the row. So under weights, tenure will be 0.25, performance will be 0.35, engagement will be 0.20, and promotion will be 0.20. So what this formula does is that it simply just tells us that there are 4 factors to include in the risk score. Each factor contributes to a percentage of the final score. So we'll say tenure will be 25%, performance 35%, engagement 20%, promotion 20%, okay? So now let's go to the second part here, that is calculated weight risk. That is, we are looking at risk contribution per factor. Okay, let's look at it carefully. So when the current row in the weight table is tenure, so that is what we mean. Now, that is years, that is if employee tenure in years is less than 1.5. Remember, we had calculated or determined tenure in years previously, okay? When you come down, you are going to see our tenure in years somewhere. Okay, this is it, right? You can see the values, right? So we are saying if it's less than 1.5 years, if yes, and factor value equal to 1, right? That's what it means. Factor value equal to 1, that means the person is at risk. If no, and factor value equals to 0, the employee is not at risk. So performance, the same thing, okay? If it's less than, say, 3, if performance is less than 3, that is performance rating, right? If we go to through, you see our performance rating, okay? So if our performance rating is less than 3 and factor value is 1, that employee is at risk. If no and is greater than 0, it's not at risk. So that is how it continues. Okay, that is how it continues through. Okay, So after that, for each factor we do, we multiply the weights, right? That is why I would say return. We multiply the weights by the factor risk, okay? That is this variable factor risk, right? Okay. And then multiply by 100. So example, if weight is 0.25 and factor value equal to 1, that is what we'll be doing is that we'll say 0.25 times 1 times 100, okay? You understand? So finally, some X here adds up all the contributions from all of our factor to get the total risk score out of 100. So in a nutshell, for each employee, it checks, do they meet each risk condition? If yes, it gives them a score equal to that factor's weight times 100, then adds them up into one final score out of 100. I hope that is clear. All right. So let's go ahead with this calculation, okay? So to correct this issue now, what we are going to do is that we are going to make a slight adjustment to formula, especially in the calculated weight risk section here, okay? So let us take this down, right? And we are going to say return some X, okay? Open parentheses. Okay, let me just take this forward. Okay, so I will say employees here. I'll say employees, comma. Okay, so you can see that the error bar that we had here has been dealt with. Okay, so let me just put this down here. So now, but we also have to take note that we have now closed these with two parentheses, right? We can take note, right? So that you make the adjustments as well, okay? You see that we had these two parentheses. We take them out. You can see what we are closing, right? We close these, and the second we close the first sum X. So we have two sum X's. So let's hit enter and see if what we have done worked correctly. Okay, so we have successfully calculated our attrition risk, okay? We have our correct attrition risk measure now. So the next will be risk category, okay? So let us create a new measure quickly, and we will call that measure risk category. So in the risk category, we will use researched thresholds to categorize risk using our attrition risk score that we determined, okay? So let us get the risk category DAX formula and we'll work on it, okay? So let's paste that here. So we have our risk category. We are creating a variable score and we are using attrition risk, okay? So you remember we don't have attrition risk score, okay? So we calculated attrition risk, right? So we are going to take out the score, and now you can see we calculated attrition risk. So initially we were to call it attrition risk score, but we didn't name it attrition risk score. So if you ever notice that you probably have used a title that you have not planned for, you check if you can continue. If you can't, you can always rename that measure, right click and rename the measure. So let's call the measure attrition risk score, okay? So that we basically can continue from there. So remember the risk category that we just calculated not long ago, just determined. So let's go back to that risk category measure and explain it very well. So we are using our attrition risk score to determine risk category, okay? So we are saying that when the score is greater than 75 or greater than or equal to 75 is critical. When the score is greater than equal to 60, we have a high risk. When the score is greater than equal to 45, we have medium risk. If it's less than 45, say 45 to 0 or 0 to 45 is low risk, okay? All right, so this basically means that we are looking at 75 to 100 as critical, 60 to 74 as high risk, 45 to 59 as medium risk, and 0 to 44 as low risk. Remember, when we go back to attrition risk score, let's look at our formula, what we did, okay? We basically used these as weights. Remember what we explained here. We use these weights, okay? So we can see why risk category will have to be that way. So we are picking this score, the score we get from there. Remember what we explained or discussed when we're talking about the attrition risk score, right? We pick that score. Now we are checking that score as against a measure that is a baseline, right? So now we created a variable called score here, and we'll say this variable equal attrition score. And we now use the switch through to iterate, right? So if score is greater than or equal to 75, it will say critical and it will stop there. If it's not greater than or equal to 75, let's say it's greater than or equal to 60, it will say high risk and stop there. If score is greater than or equal to 45, it will pick that, say medium risk and stop there. If not, it will be low risk. Okay, so that is what we have done. Okay, so now that we have built the risk score and grouped employee into what critical, high risk, medium risk, and low risk, the next question leaders always ask is, but does this actually work? To answer that, we need to measure two things: our predictive model's accuracy, the actual attrition rates over time. So let's start with the first step, which will be the attrition rate metrics, okay? So we will start by understanding how many people really left and whether the AI team is different from the rest. Remember our problem statement, right? So we will do so by first determining monthly attrition percentage for entire company. So we will be calculating the attrition rate for the entire company. And if you look at our attrition history, we have a table called attrition history, right? So we can work on our attrition history table. Okay, so we'll be working on creating that new measure called company attrition rate. Okay, so let's go to our notes and pick our company attrition rate. Okay, so let's copy this. All right, so we'll go to new measure. Okay, and this measure is company attrition rate. So say equals. Okay, remember these are nodes. So broke this down into 3 blocks. That's 4 blocks rather. So that it'll be easy for you to understand and trace problems. Okay, so let's look at what this will do. Okay, so we define a variable period end, and we use what the function max does. Remember, we had already set our date table, right? We have another variable period start. So that is why you see we use in the second block, you see we use period start, period end, because we had declared them as variables. So they don't just pop up, okay? So we have period end, right? And we have period starts. These are variables that we determined, okay? We used use relationship here because we don't have an active relationship between dates and attrition table. So we have several issues here, and we'll be walking through correcting these issues. The issue we have, say, parameter, say the date cannot be found. That's the dates column basically, and cannot find that name. Parameter is not in the correct type, so we'll be correcting this shortly, okay? looking at how we can correct this. And here it said the syntax here for return is not correct because of the unexpected termination. So we are going to work on adjusting those, okay? So that basically helps us to flag areas where we have errors. You can see the errors, or Power BI basically helps us flag areas where we have errors. So you can remember that our table name for dates is not dates, but dates, right? You see, right? So we had dates, isn't it? So it's an easy way to correct that, to remember the name of your tables, right? So that we don't make a mistake. However, we can look at the other areas as well. So we said Power BI tells us that the syntax here isn't correct, but if you look at it clearly, it's correct. So we have closed this for calculate. This parenthesis left open after periods that made this look like a wrong syntax, okay? So with all of this, we don't have any error indication anymore. So you can see there are just small variations that made us have those issues. So let's go ahead and hit enter so that we can safely say that we have calculated our attrition or company attrition rates. Okay, we have calculated that measure, company attrition rate, under our attrition history table. Now that we have calculated that successfully, I wanted to show us something. I said, if you go to our model view, you'll see the inactive relationship we have between what dates table and attrition history table, basically connecting dates from the dates table to attrition history via the termination dates column. Okay, so you can see this, and this was why it didn't understand that table. We wrote dates instead of dates. Okay, all right. So let us continue with what we have to do now. We have determined the company attrition the rate, isn't it? So let us determine an attrition rate within that team, okay, from our employees table, right? You know, we have a team. We have team from our employees table when we look at it right now. Okay, so let's go to our employees table and see that we have a column teams, okay? And within this column, we have the AI research team, right? So it's within that team that we want to determine the AI attrition rate. So let's see the rate of employees leaving the organization through the AI research team. Okay, all right. So we basically are still calculating from the attrition history, right? So we can easily find our measures there. Okay, so let's go to new measures. Now we want to calculate the AI attrition rate. Okay, so let's go ahead and calculate that. So we'll say this measure is for AI attrition rates. Okay, so this will be equals. Okay, so we'll say calculate. Okay, use the function calculate. We have basically talked about the function calculate in details, and that is why we are not talking about it now. Okay, so calculate. So we had determined what we have already determined company attrition, right? So when we open square bracket, we can see measures that we already calculated, right? So we have company attrition rate, and that is what we'll be using here. We'll say comma. We use the function keep filters, right? Because we want to retain filters, okay? So we'll say keep filters, okay? Right? Sorry about that. So we'll have to go back to calculate that. Okay, mistakenly clicked somewhere else. All right, so let's continue. So say keep filters. Okay, then we'll open parentheses. We'll say employees. Remember our employees table, and within our employees table, our column of interest is team, right? So you can go ahead and type it, or you can just search for it and click to enter, right? Employees team, okay? So we want to filter now, right? From the AI research team within the team columns in our employees table, right? So we'll say open quote and we'll say AI research, okay? So you close quotes, right? Then close parentheses for keep filters, right? And let's close the parentheses for calculate, okay? So we'll go ahead and hit enter to calculate that measure. So remember I said I wanted to click to enter keep filters, and that is why I mistakenly clicked somewhere else. So we can go ahead now and hit enter. So now we will create that AI attrition rate. So that is a rate to determine the number of people or the rates of people leaving the organization through the AI team. Okay, so we have successfully calculated that part. All right, so let us go on to the next section, which will be to automate action items. Okay, so the purpose is to assign HR interventions based on risk triggers. Okay, basically giving a label to the risk triggers we have set. Okay, and based on what happens within those triggers. Okay, so we in the employee table, basically, we are going to be creating a calculated column. Okay. Now, basically, um, there are ways we could use measures instead using various functions, right? But let us use here and use a calculated column. If we use measures, we will be creating drill through in our dashboards, okay, so that we could basically see individual employees, okay. It depends on what we want to do, really, okay, and because now simplicity matters a lot. Apart from simplicity, that it works and works efficiently to give us the result. Okay, so it is not the longer formulas, the longer ways, but the ways that will give us results for basically accurate results for clients or stakeholders. So that is basically what we are looking at here. So usually, if you know various ways, you're looking for the best ways that you could achieve that. Secondly, while writing that again, you have to be setting about your data structure. Basically, do you have missing values? Do you have to put conditions for when values are missing? For instance, we'll be using promotion stagnation, right? When we talk about due dates, basically, if you look at promotion stagnation, you see that we basically have true or false, no blank to indicate whether a value is missing or not. So it's important that you carefully look at the structure of your data. But if you come to promotion date, for instance, not every employee is promoted, right? So you can see that we have blank, right? We have blank indicating that there are cells that are empty or certain data that are not available. So this will inform your writing of that, right? Whether it's in measures you are calculating or whether it's columns you're calculating as well. The columns calculating columns will actually give you says a static presentation. Meanwhile, if you want to basically have a dynamic calculation, you use measures. So that is what we have to look into clearly before we do what we have to do. Okay, so let's click the table tools and we'll say new column. Okay, so in the new column now, we want to call that new column action items. Basically, we know that or management will know that those are the actions they need to take on specific employees based on what the item says, derived from the metrics we have determined earlier or determined earlier. So say action item. So action item is the title of the column, right? Okay. So action item. Okay. So say equals, then we can go ahead and paste the formula. Let's take this out. Okay. Okay. And okay, there's a duplication here. Okay. So now we see the formula. So we are doing this. This is what we are looking at. We are using switch through to iterate over employees in the date since review column that have greater than 540. That is, remember the 18 months. So we say if it's 18 months, we have performance review. If the employee is stagnant, okay? So if the employee is stagnant, we can basically say they need a career path meeting, okay? Then if engagement score is less than 65, the employee needs an engagement plan. So if risk category is critical, then we have to look at giving retention bonuses to such employees, okay? So with this now, we hit enter keyboard, and we are going to have our column calculated, giving us those labels, right? Basically, giving labels to metrics that we had determined earlier. Okay, you can see where these conditions are. So we have that. For instance, you can see career path meeting. We say career path meeting when there's stagnation, right? When stagnation is the major issue here. So you see the employee is stagnant because he hasn't been promoted in the past 3 years. Okay. So you can look at it. For performance review, we said when, right? When performance day since review rather is greater than 563 and so on. So it is also possible that you have an aggregation of criteria, right? You can say if, for instance, the day since review is greater than 540 and if promotion stagnation is true. So you can use those multiple conditions to actually test this based on what your plan is or what the plan for your analysis is. So it is possible. We always have to be dynamic in thinking to ensure that. Okay. All right. So now we have successfully determined our action item. So it is clear the action items we have, and it's also going to be clear what stakeholders will do. Okay. Okay. So what will happen now is that we will create the second item here, which will be, we'll create a second item, which will be the due dates, okay? And in the due dates, we want to schedule, say we want to schedule or set deadlines for our action types, okay? We've done our action type, so we'll have to really set the deadlines for our action type. So we'll be doing that still on our employee table. We will use new column, right? So it's just only nice to, since we use action items, use new column, we can use due date as columns to actually do that. So let's click on new column, okay, to add that column, and we will call that new column due date. Okay, remember we said we want to set those deadlines, right, for our action items, okay? Okay, so let us paste. All right, so we are creating a variable base date, right? And we are using the following columns from our table, okay? So if action, basically, if action items on employees table equals performance review, so we are using last review date. So the coalesce here will use higher date if last promotion date is not available, you can see that we don't have last promotion date here. So when it's not available, when it's planned, we are going to use hire date instead. So for engagement plan, because we don't have a last engagement date column, right? We don't have that. So we are using the last review dates column instead. We could use the last engagement date column if we have that provided, or in your case, you could use, say, the critical review, right? From today. Remember, we use critical risk date. So you either use last review date or critical risk date to count, basically to add from this day, okay? Then for this retention bonus will be from the critical risk date. You see, we added critical risk date, so from today as well. So now we have basically created these base dates, and for Switch to help us with this condition to iterate over these conditions, we are creating a second variable as called days to add, so which will help us add these. Okay, for performance review, it will be 30 days. For career path meeting, 90 days. For engagement plan, 21 days. And retention bonus will be 3. Okay. So if we hit enter now, we will definitely have that column, right? We will have that column, which is our due date. Okay. You can see our due dates here. All right. So we'll go ahead and do days until due date, right? Okay. So let's do that before we explain it. So we'll go to new column, and we are going to insert a DAX formula that will help us do that. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead with the formula. So days until due date. So we create a variable called due date, and you know the due date we already determined here. So this will be referencing existing due date column. So the variable today will pick today's date, right, to get the current date. And so we basically are returning this. So if the days remaining is negative, we have an overdue date. So if it's blank, it will return blank rather if no date exists. Let's look at this now. You see, we can actually perform data analysis for diagnosis sake, right? To diagnose where issues are. We can look at a descriptive way to describe what is going on, okay? And we can look at prescriptive, okay? Okay. So now, if we look at this now, this can help us in what diagnosis as well. So if basically the company policy have stated that there is need for employee performance review every 30 days, and say engagement plan every 21 days, and say bonuses, okay, every, basically using the criteria that the company policy runs with. You can see that the due date to all of these days are actually what? They're actually past the day. Okay, they're actually really past the day. All right, so we have come to the end of the first part. Okay, so where we are preparing our data, preparing our columns. Okay, so in the next class, we are going to basically look at what else we can do, like either adding more columns, like determining our model precision, our model recall, okay, and also determining critical risk, that is risk alerts. Then we go into the dashboard proper. So in the next class, we go into the dashboard. You'll be learning drill throughs and so on and so forth, and how to create risk alerts on the dashboard and communicate them effectively. So do have a wonderful day. If you have a question, remember to drop them in the comment section, and we will answer those questions directly in your comments or post them on your training platform. Okay, so remember to have a wonderful day. Also, remember to add send your suggestions when you do have suggestions, and if you do have suggestions, and that would be much appreciated. Okay. Do have a wonderful day ahead, everyone.